Hey everybody, my name's Chris. I've got a Bobcat 853 and my pickup tube in my tank has broken off. So I'm about to change it. This is the second time I've done it. It requires making a tool out of a flat pry bar to get it out and in. This is the unit. So the motor's back there. See the manifolds? And then below your motor is your hydrostat control. I'm not actually sure what it's called. And then underneath there, under all those hoses, way down in there, is the fuel pickup tube. There's a brass 90 with a rubber grommet that goes into the tank. So it's under there. A lot of internet forums are gonna tell you that you've got to pull your motor to change it. And that is not correct. So right there where you see the numbers, directly below that is where it is. So I'm going to take my grinder to a flat bar and make a tool. I will have that in the video as well. I'll show you the tool and how I get it out. All right guys, so that's my pry bar. Just a standard flat pry bar. What I've done is I've taken and I've cut a square out of the bottom of it. I've filed down the edges so that they're not sharp, just with my grinder. The front of it's still sharp, so it'll slide under it, but then all the sides around there are not sharp, that I can rub them with my fingers and it won't cut me. I've done this so that way it doesn't cut the rubber grommet that goes into the tank. So now on the other end of my machine, my fuel line comes out down here. So what I've done is I've taken just a piece of, it's like a fencing wire, but it doesn't matter what type of wire or string you tie to it. I've drilled a hole in my fuel line, and then I have about 6 feet of wire on here. I just tied it to the machine so I can't pull the wire all the way through. This way, once I get my grommet out of my tank and I pull the 90 up and whatever section of fuel line's left on there, or the pickup tube, I can pull it through, and then I've got a wire in its place. So when I go to replace the fuel line, I tie it to the wire on this end once I've pulled it through, and then I can just go to the back of the machine and pull the wire, and my fuel line will be back in the right place that it was before, without having to fight trying to get it back through. So I'm going to stick this bar in place. Once I get it in place, I will show you guys where it goes and how I pry up to get that grommet out. I use the bar as well to seat the grommet back in once I get it all in place as well. I put the bar on the top of the grommet and give it a little pressure to push it back down through. Okay guys, I'll show you how I did it and how I got it out of here. So down in here, go back into my Bobcat 853. I'll try to find you a good angle. You can see the pry bar laying flat on the top. What I've done is I put a crescent wrench on it just to get a little bit of leverage on it. So I've got my crescent wrench on the side of my pry bar. So my pry bar is way underneath. That's the end of it all sharpened up. You can see it there, it goes just underneath. And what I've done is I slid the groove that I had cut underneath the grommet, between the grommet and the tank. And then I just wiggled using my crescent wrench as leverage, up and down, turning the pry bar sideways, I guess, or rolling it, back and forth a few times, and then pop, and the grommet popped right out of the tank. So I'm gonna pull it out now and have the wire on this side. And I'll show you guys a close-up of what the grommet and the 90 looks like. All right, so I grabbed it and pulled it out. So you can see that green wire that I had tied in the back. It comes out, and that's where I had it tied to. So now when I go to put the new fuel line in, I'm gonna tie it to it again, to the new fuel line, and pull it back through. And then this is my fuel line. And there's the problem. I've got the 90, the rubber grommet, and there's no fuel pickup tube on it. It broke off in the top of the tank, or right at the top of the tank. And so laying at the bottom of my tank is a section of clear hose and the screen. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean all this up and get it. I'm putting a new fuel line in, because if I'm changing out this and I got it this far apart, you change out your fuel lines as well. I've also got the rest of the parts in the back. I'm gonna change out the primer ball as well. But I will get it all cleaned up, and once I'm ready to put it back together, I'll show you guys what I've done, and we can go from there. All right, so I'm all set up and ready to go. I've drilled a hole in my new fuel line there and attached my green wire to it so that it just goes through the end. I've got about an extra foot of fuel line on there just to be safe. When you get to this end, I put a new hose clamp on it. I've cleaned up my fitting, and then I've got my new tube, my new dip tube into my tank, as well as a new screen for the bottom of it. So you'll see here that I haven't seated my grommet all the way up to the top. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down, I'm gonna feed the screen and check valve, because that screen is a check valve, into the top of the tank. Once I got that into the top of the tank, then I'll seat my grommet, and then I'm gonna put a bunch of white lithium grease on here. So that way, once I've got my grommet seated into my tank, I can press this down and the grease will assist it so that I can get that back through into where it's supposed to be. The reason I don't seat my grommet all the way to the top is because the diameter of the hose and the diameter of the 90, the hose is smaller, so it'll allow the grommet to squeeze into the tank a lot easier. Whereas if I had the grommet all the way up to the top, I'd have a hell of a time trying to get it through the tank and seated back in. So I do it this way. Some people might not. Also, on the bottom of my screen, so there's my screen. On the bottom of the screen, the spring, I went and did a little twist in it so that it was stuck below it. Otherwise, when I'm trying to feed this through the tank, the spring just keeps compressing upwards and then it won't go into the tank. But by having it so that I've got that little extra bend in it so that it wraps around the bottom, it allows me to get it into the tank a lot easier. Now, I don't know if I should be doing that or not, but every time I've done it, that's been how I do it. It gives me success. Okay, so I got the fuel line back in, and I pulled my cable back and brought it to here. I ended up having about 6 inches extra. My new fuel line is a little bit longer than my old one, but I like the way it sits better. So I've got it run under the motor, put a new primer ball in, put a new fuel line in up to my fuel filter, and we're just about at the moment of truth where I'm gonna fire the machine up. I've squeezed my primer ball and bled off all of the fuel through the bleed off valve there, or bled off all of the air through the bleed off valve, and the system seems to be full of fuel and ready to go.